Welcome to Animated English Story. Tonight's story is about an orphan boy who had nothing but dreams. He slept hungry on the street.
Daniel crouched in the shadows of a crumbling brick wall, his eyes fixed on the warmth glowing from a bakery window. Across the street, a boy in a clean wool coat dropped a half-eaten pastry. The golden crust mocked Daniel's hollow ache as he prepared to move. He lunged from the darkness, his fingers brushing the cold pavement, but hope was fleeting. A passing carriage wheel crushed the bread into the mud with a sickening thud. He pulled his hands back, shivering as the wind tore through his thin, oversized shirt, leaving him with nothing. He sat back against the damp stone, clutching his empty stomach while the village crowd rushed past. Heavy boots splashed gray slush onto his bare feet, yet no one looked down. A merchant shoved him aside to make space for a display crate, treating him like a ghost in the street. Daniel crawled toward a pile of discarded burlap sacks, seeking any shred of warmth. He traced a crude drawing of a house in the dirt, then erased it with a trembling palm. There was no place for him here. Shaking the frost from his hair, Daniel stood up. He turned away from the village, his eyes locked on the horizon where the first hint of dawn light touched the trees. Daniel pushed the heavy wooden crate into the back of the grocery store, every inch of wood scraping against his raw, bleeding palms. The air was thick with the smell of rotted produce. His muscles screamed in protest. But he didn't stop until the task was finally done. He stood there, gasping for breath. The shop owner tossed 2 coins onto the dirty floor with a sneer. As Daniel knelt to retrieve them, the man spat on his worn boots. Nearby, a group of men laughed, calling him a street rat. Daniel said nothing. He simply wiped his eyes with a dirty sleeve and walked into the shadows. By midnight, he sat beneath the flickering glow of a single street lamp. He pulled a tattered, rain-soaked textbook from his bag as if it were made of gold. His stomach cramped from a deep, hollow hunger, but his mind was elsewhere. He traced the complex equations with a shaking finger. Even when a passing car splashed muddy water across his legs, he did not look up. The ink on the page was the only light he needed to see. Just a few more pages, he whispered to the wind. The hunger was temporary, but knowledge was his exit. He tucked the book into his shirt and walked back into the dark. Daniel sat on the dusty curb, the streetlights flickering above his tattered notebook. His clothes were thin and worn, and his stomach tightened with a sharp, familiar hunger. In the dim, unreliable light, he tried to focus on his words. A lone scholar in the dark city, Mr. Miller, an old teacher, stopped abruptly. He watched the boy for a long time before stepping forward. A heavy, warm hand landed on Daniel's shoulder. He led the boy away from the cold street and into a study filled with the scent of old paper and hope. A bowl of hot soup steamed on the desk as Mr. Miller pushed a stack of textbooks forward. Daniel looked at the food, then at his mentor, and gripped his pen with newfound iron will. From that night, the desk light burned until dawn. He stopped wandering the streets, filling page after page with complex math equations and literature notes. Every ink stroke was a step away from his past and a leap toward his future. The results were posted. Daniel's finger traced the list until it reached the very top. He saw Mr. Miller in the hallway and offered a single, knowing nod. Picking up his bag, he walked toward the library, ready for the next lesson to begin. Daniel stepped onto the elite campus, his worn bag clashing with the rows of luxury cars. Inside the hall, students in designer clothes whispered behind their hands. He was an outsider, a ghost in a world of inherited wealth, ignored by those who thought they were his betters. When a student kicked his notebook, sending it sliding across the floor, Daniel simply retrieved it without a word. He spent his nights in the back of the library, eyes locked on lines of code and market data, building a future they couldn't even imagine. By the second semester, the invisible work became a reality. During a class presentation, Daniel demonstrated his automated trading algorithm. The room fell silent. The professor stared at the screen, then at Daniel, unable to hide his shock as the numbers danced. While his peers spent their nights at parties, Daniel stayed in his dorm, launching his second project.
His inbox began to overflow with partnership requests from major tech firms. The mockery had turned into a desperate curiosity.
He did not look back at those who had laughed. Daniel focused on the glowing screen, where his startup valuation climbed with every passing minute. He wasn't just a student anymore.
The eviction notice was a white flag of defeat taped to the door. Daniel stared at the screen.
His bank balance, a mocking $12. 6 months of failure weighed on his shoulders.
He tossed his cold coffee into the trash, the hollow thud echoing in the empty room. This was his final stand. Line by line, he tore the old code apart under the dim glow of his laptop. At dawn, with bloodshot eyes, he pushed the update to the server. Then,
the world woke up. By noon, 10,000 downloads. By sunset, 1 million. His inbox became a storm of venture capitalists and million-dollar offers. The impossible had finally happened. The code didn't just work, it thrived.
now, Daniel sits in a glass-walled sanctuary overlooking the city's skyline. The ticker tape of his stock price climbs steadily, a digital monument to his survival. He walks past the diner where he once stood in line for bread, his tailored suit a shield against the cold. The hunger is gone, replaced by the heavy responsibility of a global empire. Daniel stepped onto the cracked pavement of Oak Street, facing the rusted gate of his nightmares.
He could still feel the phantom sting of the leather belt and the biting chill of the basement floor where he was once locked away.
The shadows of his childhood orphanage loomed large, cold, and unforgiving. He pushed open the heavy wooden door, but the smell of decay was gone, replaced by fresh pine.
Inside, 30 children sat at brand new desks. Daniel watched a young boy solve a problem on the board.
The boy smiled, a spark of hope that Daniel never had at that age. He simply nodded. Outside, a man who once spat at Daniel when he was a beggar now stood by the curb.
The man removed his hat and bowed his head in a silent plea for recognition. Daniel didn't boast.
He pulled out a stack of funding requests, his silence more powerful than any insult could ever be.
A reporter's lens caught his eye. Daniel pointed at the building and spoke firmly. Pain built this foundation.
Not luck. He turned away from the flashing lights, heading toward the station. There were other cities, other children, and work that was far from finished. His journey continued in the shadows.